Thank you for having me, and it's great to see you again. As you may tell, that I am not Estonian and I'm not Latvian, but and although I'm working for the Estonian University of Life Sciences, I do actually live in Latvia, but originally from the UK. I spent, I suppose, the majority of time in the north, well, all of the time in the north. I was at Sheffield University. Then I had my children. We lived just south of Sheffield for about 15 years before leaving and traveling around the world a little bit. So we went to Denmark. My husband got a job there, and then on to the US before landing in Latvia about nearly 15 years ago. So I've actually left the country about 20 years ago. So I don't really almost consider myself as British anymore. It's almost like a foreign country, I'm afraid. But still, it's been quite a journey. And when I got into Latvia, I got back into academia. So, and this is part of my journey along finding out more about rural Latvia. So I think if we can actually play the video, because that really gives a glimpse of Latvia.
I'll share the screen now.
Okay, I think we can finish there. So if I share my screen. Okay, Latvian Meadows, past, present and future. You would maybe think perhaps that was a strange introduction to Latvian Meadows, but this is part and parcel of Latvian identity. It's the song and the dance festival, and you have to remember here that you got an overview from the height of how many people were actually at that festival. It's a huge, huge festival, but only about 1.9 million people actually live in Latvia. So I think from what I remember, there's 20,000 singers or 30,000 singers and 20,000 dancers over the week. It's an incredible amount of people of all ages, from young to old, men and women, all partaking in song and dance. But also the meadows are a part and parcel of that, because as you may have seen, a lot of those headdresses that the women were wearing were wreaths of flowers that come from the summer meadows in Latvia. It's part of the past identities, and it's kind of built on the sort of industrious peasant who mowed the field, and sort of like industry and physical activity is still greatly valued. These are my neighbours actually who make these haycocks. So the ability to do this sort of work is still in the community, although of course it's getting less and less as people grow older, and less people know how to do it. And yet, to some extent, sometimes the younger generation are also rediscovering these sorts of things. Saunas or pirates are another aspect of Latvian culture, which are very integral to the community living. And again, very much based on the meadows. And here you see a group who are collecting the flowers that are needed for the traditional pirates, where they use the sort of branches from the trees of the local forest and the flowers for teas and for aromatherapy. Do forgive me if my voice and my brain goes a little bit. Unfortunately, I broke my wrist the other week, so I'm trying my best to keep going in one direction. But anyway, so the saunas and the meadows are very integrated into the very identity of Latvian culture. People really appreciate the very diverse nature of Latvian meadows. It's sort of something in some ways that has been very much lost in the UK. We have lost those flower-rich meadows. I mean, and they're coming back, you know, people are creating them just for the sake of creating them. But here, they are an integrated part of the landscape. But they are diminishing, which is one of the main problems, even though it is such a crucial part of the identity. Still, due to the sort of industrialized agriculture and also modern day expectations of life in rural areas, those meadows are under threat, and sort of definitely by neglect as much as anything, but also through improvement of landscapes of the grasslands. Other conflicts are with the wild boar. Now, this is taken from my master's thesis, where I examined actually the conflict over the management of wild boar in rural Latvia. And here we see damage that was done just in one night, and you can see the vast area covered, and sometimes there was even worse than that. And the wild boar were almost actively encouraged by hunters who obviously go and hunt the wild boar. But then there was this conflict between, you know, the hunters who had the ability to keep their numbers under control and quite enjoyed the sport of hunting, which conflicted with the farmers trying to keep their pastures free of wild boar. And so it's sort of the expectations and the management strategies were obviously in conflict here. Which doesn't help grasslands. So the question is, do these meadows actually have even a role to play in today's society, in today's agriculture? Is it just a sort of a caricature of rural life, something that people think about but isn't actual reality? Can it be part of the flourishing cultural scene? You know, what happens to the saunas? What happens to those flower wreaths? Are they really made from meadow plants, or do we have to import the flowers sometimes? These are all sort of questions of how and what we think and what we value of meadows today. What is their role? What is their future? And in the top corner, you can see a picture of sort of sculptures made from the meadow grasses, which this is another idea that one particular small community, Calderbrunia, who have a meadow museum, very much realizing the culture that is based on meadows and how they can perhaps use meadows for the future. But again, this has become an art scene. It's not necessarily an active part of modern agriculture. You see here that this is my husband actually stacking our own hay, because we use hay on for our animals. We have alpacas, we have 20. And this flower-rich meadow is very much good for keeping them in good health. If we fed them the enriched grasslands, which many cows and, you know, for the dairy and beef industry, if they're fed on that sort of rich grass mixture, not mixture, but sort of straight grasses, it doesn't do them any good. And the diversity of plants is actually very healthy for low intensity agriculture. But again, you have to think, well, is this just part of hobby farming, which you could say, because, you know, in some ways, my job funds our alpaca farm. It's not, you know, it's not an industry that is going to keep us in a livelihood. So with these sort of things in mind, these meadows are an integral part of Latvian identity, and yet under threat from modern day agriculture, from a lack of values, from a lack of income being able to be generated by these, but still a very key part of their cultural identity. We're beginning to look and see how we can actually help the farmers that do utilize these landscapes. How can we help them to manage their landscapes better? Is there a possibility of using technology to help them? So with this in mind, the Codex, which is a Living Lab project, or this grassland is part of the Codex Living Lab projects. We are looking at the Latvian landscapes. We're looking at the methodologies and the decision-making support tools that we can possibly enable farmers to manage these landscapes better. And also with the farmers. It's very much important that we work with the farmers to help them develop things which help them to manage their own landscapes better. So we hope to centre on the needs of farmers and the societal challenges that they actually have, and try and link them together with digital innovation that will enable them to sustainably develop their enterprises. Now, most of these are actually beef farmers or dairy farms, rather than sort of, they will not be arable, of course, because that would be, we wouldn't be using grasslands for that. So it's very much about livestock farming and supporting livestock farming. So it's a collaboration between the Estonian University of Life Sciences, which has already has a drone project where they're monitoring the coastal meadows of Estonia. So they have quite a bit of experience of using these drones to monitor different landscapes, but like I say, particularly the coastal grasslands. And we're trying to bring these together with the farmers. Oh, that's not going to work. in the Latvian landscapes. All of these farms have been designated as biotopes, and they require a sensitive management of, as we've talked about. And it's crucial to manage these in such a way that rare plants, pollinators and birds can be supported by these biodiverse landscapes. So we have 3 different types of meadows. There's not just meadows, or not just sort of grasslands, open grasslands or whatever. There's the wooded meadows, which are unique to within Latvia to Gauja National Park. These have a certain density of trees, but in between it allows the animals to graze. And there are certain plants that are associated with that type of landscape. And here you see a picture of this particular farm that we've already actually been to visit. I'll talk a little bit more about that later on. You also see one of the challenges that we had this year. We had an early winter, and it's carried on, but which is one of the reasons for my broken wrist. But anyway, the other biotopes that we'll be looking at are the floodplains of Latgale, which is in the east of Latvia. I suppose that would have been helpful to actually have a map on here. These ones are, was it in Gauja? It's very much a hilly topography. And the same in central Latvia where I'm living, but elsewhere in Latvia it tends to be quite flat, and the Latgalian area is has a lot of lakes and things like that as well. So floodplains are very common in the Latgalian region of the East Latvia. So what we will be doing is we'll be meeting with the farmers, and we have already started that process. The idea was that we would actually have the drone operators, the farmers and the grassland expert all come to meet together in late autumn and survey the properties and look at the landscapes, and to see and to have the farmers walk us through that landscape. As I said, we had busy schedules from the university, so we didn't actually manage to get early enough, and then winter suddenly appeared. I really did come very, very early. And so I think it was mid-November, and we had significant snowfalls, which is not great for actually walking the topography of a land. So this will be an ongoing process into the spring, where we will be meeting up again to talk about what the needs are of the farmers. So we have a grassland expert, and she will give her perspective. But of course, the farmers know more about their own landscapes. They know where the problem areas are, but some of these areas are actually quite large. So some of them are sort of 19 hectares of one particular area, and then they may have an area somewhere else rented from maybe the forestry department or from other landowners. So they can have pockets of land in many different areas, which makes actually getting around that landscape a little bit more difficult. Some are more compact, but not all of them. And certainly the Latgalian one is hundreds of hectares. So that's going to be quite a huge amount of area to try and monitor and to get around to see all the areas that may be a problem. So the other problem is sort of, can we actually match what the farmers want with what the drones can actually do? And so this will very much depend upon a dialogue between the grassland expert, the farmers and the drone operators, to both see what are the needs, but also how can they be addressed and whether it is possible. And if it is possible, what are the different I'm trying to think of the word now, the actual instruments that are needed on the drones to do the relevant monitoring. So we have already, let's say, got some questions from the farmers of, well, what can they actually do? So can the drones precisely map the location of the trees? showing the tree heights, volumes, canopy, and tree species. And that would be really useful for the farmers, and it's sort of something that could be done in early spring before a lot of the work got going. And the answer from the drone experts was, well, yes, because it's relatively sparse, there should be something that can be done apart from the actual tree species that may be a problem. Now, this may be a matter of development from the drone operators. You know, maybe they need more experience, or it may be that it's just not possible. And these are some things that we will need to work on over time, and to see what exactly could be feasible, you know, what can be seen, because the drone operators are drone operators. They're not necessarily ecology experts. Some of them have got more experience in ecology than others. Some of them have got more of the interest of the, you know, the sort of what the drone patterns can be found. So it's a matter of us all learning along the way of what the problems are. Some of the areas that the farmers have already been working on are now in a better state than they were before. So they're beginning to get back the biodiversity. But these need remapping, and it's sort of like, can the drone be a good way of doing that, of being able to show the habitat types and the subtypes? Can it actually be monitored in this way, in which case it will actually enable the farmers to claim better, higher subsidy payments, because the better quality of the biotope, the more money they get, which is always a good thing for rural areas. But of course, there are sort of some problems again with drones. Is sort of like it could be quite a complex task, but maybe there are some ways of developing this again, pattern types, color, you know, there are all sorts of different things that it can measure, but which ones will be relevant, we will be looking into more. Another question was, can it detect the springs that are underneath the ground? You know, does it, can you get a thermal camera? Will it find that? And certainly sometimes they can, you know, sort of, it can show not the operators that we have not had that experience. But it's something that we will have a look at and see what is possible, and whether we can actually detect these areas. Because of course, we think of the northern regions as perhaps not somewhere that experiences drought. But as we've seen in the last few years, where I live in particular, for some reason I can watch the rain clouds go to the north, the west, the south, the east, and for some reason our little areas of pocket where there is no rain. And we had 8 weeks of no rain, and it was really disheartening to see, you know, my garden dying, but also the fact that it impacts the actual grasses that can grow in those areas, and that again impacts the what grows in the meadows as well. And if we have our animals on eating it down to the ground, because it isn't growing fast enough, that's obviously going to impact the following future years of management. And so we really need to know, where is the water, and, you know, how close it is to the ground, where can we see these sorts of areas. And we have a diverse number of animals, as I said about the wild boar. Now, the wild boar were impacted by African swine fever. Very fortunately for us, it meant that we had a lot less damage over the last few years. It's starting to creep up again. But we also have lots and lots of beavers, and they're very good at diverting water. And sometimes that's a good thing, and sometimes it's not. So it's sort of, again, could the drones actually monitor where these are? And it probably can be done by sort of examining the changes that happen of the way that the beavers actually divert the water and the structures that they build. Another issue, and this is one of my alpacas, another issue that we have is expansive species. These are native species. They're not invasive species. but they are ones that, if they're given the right sort of environment, will suddenly expand. And this, you can see, is cow parsley, which has got quite a hold and is quite a significant problem for farmers. And for one thing, it makes very low value hay because it makes it quite twiggy, and it's very difficult for the animals to eat. I mean, for us personally, with cow parsley, we can end up with alpacas getting it stuck in their teeth and abscesses starting. So, you know, from a personal point of view, we don't want all this cow parsley. The drone operators did say that, unfortunately, it's very difficult to tell the difference between cow parsley and, say, some of the other very similar species. But as I actually said, there's, you know, in some ways, there's the difference in timing. The cow parsley grows after ground elder, both of which have got small white flowers, but both of them are expansive species anyway. So these small white expansive species, it doesn't really matter which ones they are. If they're growing in abundance, they're a problem. So maybe we do not actually need to know the specific species in this case. We just need to know where they're growing. So what are the challenges for this particular project? Well, seasonality and the changing seasons. So as I said, we ended up with a very early winter, which meant it very difficult for us to get to the farms and talk with the farmers in good time. But also seasons are changing. We had a very mild February, incredibly mild. We almost saw the grass in our area, and many parts of Latvia did actually lose snow cover. However, only 2 weeks ago, we had about 30 or 40 centimetres of snow dumped in one day, which of course set us back, and it's still very much winter here. And although the last couple of days it has started to disappear, and maybe by the end of the next 2 weeks, we may have lost the snow. But snow can stay on the ground until well into April. So, you know, different years bring different seasons, and quite markedly different. We can have very wet summers. We can have very hot summers. Usually, I reckon, compared to the UK, we have much better summers and much better winters as far as proper winters and proper summers. But that does vary, of course. We can get, have known it about 35 degrees when we're trying to cut hay, and humid. And that is not a fun job when it's like that. But you have to go by the state of the grasses. If the grasses need to be cut at that particular time, that's when you do it. And that may be the small window you have to cut grass, because certainly for us, we have to cut dry and stack out of the rain to ensure that we have a decent hay in the winter time. So many challenges for meadows. The seasons, you know, we do have the seasons can be very short, but they can be very long. So how do you actually monitor that? Do you monitor each year at a particular time, or do you monitor according to the phenology? I think it's phenology of the year, where, you know, that particular plant is growing at that particular week, and that's when you go and monitor it, or do you monitor in June every year, sort of thing? So it's interesting to try and think about what is the best way of monitoring these landscapes over time. But the other things that this is bringing together academics, it's bringing together experts who are consultants for the farmers and the farmers themselves, and trying to ensure that all their knowledge is validated. As in, you know, they all bring something to the table. They are all part and parcel of that knowledge generation. And sort of sometimes it can be easy to dismiss farmers' knowledge because it's not academic or something. The terminology they use may not be quite right. So we're very much looking at how we can ensure that everybody is given due respect for their knowledge that they have and what they bring, and trying to work together to generate this new knowledge of whether, you know, we can actually make good use of digital technology. So what next? We keep the dialogue going. We try and ensure that the farmers stay on board, of course. The drone monitoring will begin in spring and summer, and that's I have a Latvian student who's with us in this Estonian university, and she will be very much involved in trying to liaise between all the different people so that we don't have a translation problem. Our first analysis will probably be in autumn, and this is where we bring the landscape architecture into this, because we're very much into sort of the dissemination of information about landscapes and making that accessible for people to be able to see. So visualizing that the information from the drones and making it accessible for farmers. And then we have to, of course, feed that back to the farmers in an understandable format. And this is, part of this dialogue, ensuring that the information we get is fed back in an appropriate manner, in a timely manner, so that they understand what we're doing, what we're trying to do. So thank you for your attention. And that's what we aim to do. And I'll stop sharing.
Thank you very much, Joanna, for your presentation. Julie, I don't think we have any questions in the chat, so maybe we can open the floor.
No, we haven't so far. Has anybody got any questions they'd like to raise a hand for? I've got a quick question meanwhile, Joanna, thank you very much for that. That was fascinating. So just having the drone technology, do you think it will help farmers think more at a landscape scale collectively then in terms of managing these grasslands, whereas before they might have just thought at an individual farm scale? Or were they always thinking perhaps at a landscape scale?
It has already begun, because there was a project called Grasslife, which is linked into an EU-wide project to improve grasslands, because they've been under, across Europe, they're under threat. So there's been this active sort of promotion of Grasslife, but that has just come to an end. So this is one way of actually extending that project. But yeah, I think that landscape scale, because it gives them a larger overview, and hopefully the networks that have already been generated within Grasslife will be helpful in also disseminating some of the information that comes out of this. I mean, in some ways, it is very much feeling our way along to see if it will actually be of benefit. Our drone operators are looking for the information anyway. They want their, extra experience. So it's a way of bringing this all together and seeing, well, what else can we move on from that? Which sounds a bit vague sometimes, but I think sometimes we just have to try and see where we go.
Okay, thank you. Katie, Stephen, you have your hand up.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, yeah. Hi.
Hi. Yes, I'm grassland specialist for Natural England, which is the government body in England for wildlife conservation. We're doing quite a lot of work at the moment with satellite imagery on identifying different types of grassland and identifying species-rich grassland on a landscape scale. Just wondered whether you'd looked at any work along those lines at all using the Sentinel satellite.
I think the department where the drone operators are coming from, and because this is sort of like two departments as well that we're working together, I believe that they have looked at some of that, and the questions that some of the farmers had, they did suggest would possibly be more appropriate at the satellite level. But some of the other things is like, like looking for some of the smaller species that you wouldn't necessarily see from satellites, may be possible with the drones. This again, it's sort of like, does it give us any added advantage? And the only way to find out is to send those drones out to have a look and see what we can actually see.
Yeah, interested to hear the results.
Mm.
Thank you.
Thank you. Charlotte, you have a question?
Yeah, hi Joanna, really interesting talk. We're actually working with the WWT creating some floodplain meadows case studies at the moment with farmers, and it'd be really interesting to compare some of our findings. But one thing we're finding is that a lot of the farmers sort of struggle with timings of hay cuts and things like that, in part because, in part because there's restrictions with their agri-environment agreements, but in part because they have to try and balance biodiversity gain and making sure they produce high quality hay. And I just wondered if that's a similar situation in Latvia.
It's an absolute nightmare.
Yeah.
I mean, like I say, because I also do this very personally, you know, sort of we have to try and gauge when, because if you cut, we did do one year, we cut too early because of the type of cutting, because we only do the small bales. And the reason we do small bales is, I mean, at this time of the year, it's far easier for us to transport a small bale on a sledge than it is to try and get the tractor across, because we've got a very hilly topography. But obviously the challenge of it is 30, I think it's actually about 60 centimeters in places, so it's not something you want to be walking a bale of hay across. No. So a sledge is ideal, and those small bales are ideal on a sledge. But many farmers, of course, do the bigger bales and they can stay outside, and that's maybe not as much of a problem. But we did cut too early one year and ended up with quite a lot of rotted hay, which doesn't. But also there are times when it's raining, and we don't get that window, and the grasses have gone past their best, which isn't useful either. I mean, fortunately for us, alpacas are not high protein. Well, not necessarily. They're not high dependent animals for the, the energy and this sort of thing. They're actually very efficient feeders. We worked out that we did have 3 sheep, which my husband absolutely hated. But we had 3 of them, and they ate 1.8 times as much as an alpaca. So it was quite significant. The alpacas are quite efficient in that way. But then if you go to our neighbour, they've got dairy cattle. So, the protein requirement is obviously going to be much, much higher. They're also very conscious of keeping this biodiversity and trying to maintain that. So, yeah, it's one of the most stressful times of the year, because you may only have a short window of time, you may have a long period of time. And trying to get the diversity. And the grassland expert actually was telling us that, I mean, at one time, it used to be that if you had biodiverse meadows, you did not cut until August the 15th. After that, you would cut. But then by that time, most of your grass is actually not very good.
Yeah.
It took them 7 years to get the agricultural ministries to change that requirement, and now they actually suggest that we cut at different times of the year to impact different plants and give different plants a chance. So sometimes you cut early, sometimes you cut later, but then, as I say, sort of year to year, we are seeing very vastly different plants on our land, as different things have benefited from, either a wetter winter or drier winter, colder winter, So, I mean, this winter, we've only had a couple of days of -20s or something. Normally, we'd have at least 2 weeks of that. And it may be on top of, sort of, it could be frozen ground underneath, but this time we have got soft ground underneath. So the water is, as things are melting, it's going straight into the ground. This will all change what we have next year. But also it's meant the moles we've got a problem of. So it's,
thanks, Joanna. Just to hurry along, sorry, I didn't want to interrupt.
No.
There was a comment from Rob in the chat about the satellites potentially being a lot cheaper than using drones. Do you want to elaborate on that, Rob? Yeah, it disappeared. Left the comment and gone.
Oh no, it's coming.
Sorry. Yeah, it was just to reiterate what was said before about the possibility of satellite imagery being just more efficient and more consistent. And yeah, I was just going to ask the question whether you'd looked into that.
Okay.
Well, no, I haven't. It's sort of, again, it's one of these things where, you know, we look at what I have available, and, you know, it's sort of like, well, it's seeing if there is added value of the drones. If there's not, at the end of the day, then that is a result. You know, it's sort of the operators are investigating themselves to see what is possible with the drones, you know, what they can bring to the farming community. And if the satellite imagery is vastly cheaper and works better, then that is something else, of course, that we have to take into consideration. But that's probably not going to be the issue with the wooded meadows in particular, I'm thinking, because obviously you've got canopy issues. So you will not see underneath the canopy. Whereas the drones, I think they're looking at actually having the smaller drones that can go in between the trees, which you can't do with a satellite, as far as I'm aware anyway.
And Steve Chapman, you've made a note about work going on about using AI to train species identification. Is there anything you wanted to add to that?
I don't think so. No, I mean, yeah, it just may be of interest more generally. Obviously, it's not quite the same, but something that's been explored, particularly in the context of results-based payments. But obviously, could also be applied with the kind of citizen science approaches where farmers are taking photos, because the capacity to analyze images, etc., is vast.
Yeah. I mean, that's what we see with landscape architecture. You know, we're looking at, you know, how can AI actually enhance what we do. So, you know, this is something that we would probably be much more aware of when it comes to the analysis part and thinking about how we can, you know, what we can do with all this information.
Excellent, thank you. I can't see any more hands. Shout if you have a question or a comment. No? Okay, I think we'll probably conclude it there. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
The recording will be available on our YouTube platform, so look out for that.
Yes, and my email is on there for those who wanted to keep in touch. That's great.
Okay. Anything to add, Katerina?
No, thank you. Thank you, Joanna, again, for an interesting presentation. And we'll see you all in May for another seminar on 18th of May, where we'll have Professor Ruth Nettle from Melbourne University speaking about her research. So thank you very much, and see you soon. Thank you.
Bye.